But stompers on the loose, they drove him away.
Welcome to a new edition of the Neon Jazz interview series with Canadian jazz singer and arranger Emilie-Claire Barlow. This award-winning and critically acclaimed two-time Juno Award winner and six-time nominee has released 11 self-produced albums on her own label called Empress Music Group. On June 1st, 2020, we caught up with her to talk about the strange new COVID-19 world, new projects, her life and music, and so much more. Enjoy this interview.
Where are you located exactly? How's everything going?
Well, I'm in Mexico. I'm in a small town on the Pacific coast of Mexico, and I split my time generally between here and Toronto, which is my hometown. But when the COVID pandemic hit, my partner and I, Steve, and I decided to wait it out here, which seemed like the less risky option than doing all the traveling and quarantining we would need to do to get back to Toronto. So that's where we are. We're on the Pacific coast of Mexico.
So how's everything going there? Are you guys, everything going good, or what's happening? What's the status there?
Well, in terms of COVID, it's a small town, and there are really relatively few cases here. So we feel safe in that regard. We've been pretty much isolating. So we feel good about the decision to stay here. We're just sort of watching the world right now and trying to process everything that's happening. So, in general, there's a sadness and a heaviness, but we are okay.
Well, that's good. I think everything was starting. I don't think anything was ever really at a highly stable point in America, but right now with everything that has happened, with all of the rioting that's happening around the country, I think we have finally hit that point where we've held it in for so long, and I really genuinely believe that no one has anything. I don't want to be too dark, but I think a lot that's happening here in this country is that people have nothing to look forward to. There's no distraction. There's no anything. Everything's shut down. Everybody's just, I think we've hit a point with what's going on here that's like coming to the end of this pandemic. We have another layer of unknown with what's going on right now. Kansas City's usually, we'll have protests, but we're relatively immune to big things going on, and things are happening here. So it's strange. It's very strange.
Yeah, I was looking at the news this morning, and I was in anticipation of talking to you too. I thought, I wonder what's going on in Kansas City. But I think you're right. It is really dark, There's obviously so much pent-up anger, and then, like you said, to add the pandemic on top of it, and everybody's been cooped up and isolating and struggling, in so many ways. It's really hard to comprehend.
Well, and I think the thing is that all of this was sparked, this latest round of everything was sparked by racism, but I think it's going to turn into a class thing now, because ultimately the middle and the lower classes are the ones that are getting affected the most by what's going on. So I think there's a lot of things that are really becoming a part of this overall. And I don't know what the end game is going to be. I don't know what decisions are going to be made that are going to be lasting, that are going to satiate everybody, for people to be like, all right, we're good, we're done. So it's and then I haven't even really, I've kind of thought about the spread of COVID, because at this point we're going straight into large gatherings, and I know there's masks, but, when you're at a protest, I don't know that people are really that concerned about, staying completely covered up. So it's and basically what's going to happen again for people that play by the rules is there's a potentiality that if they do keep doing this and numbers spike, we're going to go into another lockdown, and all of us that have been really good by playing by the rules will become the ones that will have to abide by this whole thing again. And that's been the hope when everything, we started opening up around the last week of May, very soft opening in Kansas City. And in fact, today was the day that things were really going to kind of start another phase of opening up. It'll be another week or two before we know of any firm numbers from all of these gatherings that are happening. So it's interesting, to put it mildly. So we'll see what happens.
Oh, yes. Yeah, yes. Yeah, absolutely. To put it mildly, there really are no words.
Yeah, no, there's none. But at any rate, I figure talking about the music's probably a good thing to do right now. So thanks for taking a minute out to talk about it.
Sure. Thanks for having me. It's nice to meet you.
Nice to meet you. So the one thing, too, is, you know, we're in a pandemic, and you have music out, and it's probably bittersweet because people have probably more time to listen to music, but you can't tour and do anything live. So kind of talk to me a little bit about that.
Yeah, you know, it's been interesting. I mean, really, this is all I know in my life in terms of my job. I've never had any other jobs. So from the time I was quite young, I'm a singer. I make music. That's what I do. So I've just been continuing to do that, and I'm really fortunate to be in a situation where my boyfriend Steve Webster is a professional musician, lifelong bass player, composer, producer, and you know, so we're together and we have a studio, so we can continue to make music. I feel really grateful that I'm able to do that. And I also feel that, you know, the internet and the streaming platform has allowed me to reach far more people than I ever could have in earlier days with a physical distribution deal. And I know that there are pros and cons, and there are issues there. But I didn't know what to expect. You know, I had a tour in April that I was going to do in Canada, and it became, you know, as March approached, it became increasingly clear that was probably not going to happen. So that was sort of the first big thing that happened in terms of, you know, my day-to-day. So the tour was canceled, and then all the summer festivals and everything were canceled, which was expected. And you know, I mean, for me, again, I feel for my bandmates and a lot of people, musicians whose livelihood depends basically on playing live gigs. That's been really, really difficult for them. So sort of that's where my thoughts are. I'm trying to work with as many musicians as I can remotely. A lot of them are set up to record in their home studios. For instance, the saxophone player who's playing on the newest track that's Kelly Jefferson, and he's a longtime bandmate of mine, and so we sent him the track, and he recorded it at his home studio and sent it back to us. So I love that we can use technology that way and continue to employ musicians and continue to make music and send it out there into the world.
Well, let's talk a little bit about your beginnings. Talk to me about where you were born and raised and kind of how music became a part of your life.
Sure. I'm originally from Toronto, Ontario, Canada, and that's where I grew up, and I still live there part-time. And both of my parents are professional musicians, so really music was a part of my life since the time I was born. My mother is a professional singer, and the majority of her career was in the studio. She was a session singer, so she sang on backgrounds on albums. She sang tons and tons of commercials and jingles. She did those radio station IDs, you know, CKFM, all of that kind of stuff. And my dad was a session drummer and percussionist, and he, you know, also played a lot live. He played in a group called the Boss Brass, which you may be familiar with, Rob McConnell's Boss Brass. Rob McConnell's a trombone player and led a big band called the Boss Brass for many years. So really my upbringing and my childhood was all about music. I grew up spending time in studios, and when I was about 8 or 9 years old, I started doing jingles and commercials myself. So I started working professionally at that age. They needed a kid voice, and I was there. So I think it was a Tide commercial or something. And I really haven't stopped working since. I went to a music theater high school and studied music theater, put together my first jazz quartet when I was in my second last year of high school. And that's when I really started playing gigs. We played locally, and we got a 10-night run at the Toronto Jazz Festival, which was a huge leap for me in terms of learning to put a show together and performing on a nightly basis. And in my early 20s, I started releasing records. And since then, I've released 12 albums and many singles. And that's the snapshot.
Yeah, no, it sounds like you were pretty much destined for this life.
I think so. Yeah, I think so. All my siblings are musical, and even my aunts and uncles, and actually even going back beyond my parents, both of my grandmothers were performers. My grandmother on my mother's side was a singer and piano player, and she used to sing. I don't know if you've heard of the Massey Hall. It's a great venue in Toronto, and for most Canadian artists and some American artists, it's really the holy grail. It's the place that you dream of playing. And she used to play in this bar across the street from Massey Hall called the Silver Rail, and she what was the name of the show now? Sing Along with Jeannie. And all of the people would come from Massey Hall after the show and go and see her sing. And it turned into a diner called Fran's. And when I finally played Massey Hall, we went to Fran's after, just a little homage to her. And my grandmother on my father's side was a dancer and singer, and she was on television shows. So really, I was destined, or my parents would have been very disappointed if something else had happened.
Yeah, I think I remember Charlie Parker had a recording that was at Massey Hall that was relatively popular. Yeah,
absolutely. Yeah.
So I do know quite enough about Massey, and through Ernesto Cervini, I'm really tapping into the Toronto scene, and Corey Weeds, and he's done so much amazing work up there. So yeah, it's been I'm very familiar with the scene and how important it's been. So we're in the middle of a pandemic right now. You have 12 albums. You have a lot of experiences on stage, and I think probably we're at a point right now, or we've been at points during this where there's probably some good memories and some magic moments that you probably thought about and remembered because musicians are longing for that live element again. Talk to me a little bit about maybe some memories that are keeping you positive.
Oh, wow. Okay. Well, the thing about it is that being on the road with my band is it's just such a special experience and a special relationship that you have with these people, because you're really in such close quarters for long periods of time that casting is key. You really want to have good people around you. And so that is a huge part of the experience, is the personal relationships that you have with your musicians. And we have my core band, it's 6 of us plus my tour manager. We love to laugh, and that's so important to me. And one of the girlfriends of my drummer's girlfriend, actually, Celia, who is a wonderful singer, and she met up with us on the road at one point and toured several years ago. And, she was hanging out with us where we were staying, and then out for dinner, and then in the green room, and then she went to the audience and watched the show. And she said something after which really struck me. She said, what I love about you guys, she said, you just take the dressing room hang and you just bring it right out onto the stage. She's like, there's no difference. And, that's kind of always been, for me, the way that I bring myself to the stage. I don't have a performing persona. And again, nothing against that. It's just it's a personal choice. I am who I am, and I talk to my bandmates the same way we talk to each other in the dressing room. So there's an elegance to our show, but there's also a casualness, and people really can see the fun that we're having on stage, and they can see how much we respect and admire and enjoy each other's company. So sharing those moments on stage with my band, and some memories that come to mind are, one of the largest shows I ever did was the Montreal Jazz Festival, and really the Montreal Quebec Jazz Festival is one of the premier festivals in the world. And over the years, I worked my way up through the small venues to bigger and bigger venues, and then the bigger indoor venues. And then finally, we got the big main stage outdoor show. And the first of the 2 shows, there were 30,000 people. And the festival is set up in a way that there's several outdoor stages, and so they have it organized so people really move from one stage to the next to the next. So maybe 15 minutes before the concert's about to start, there was nobody out there, and there was just this big, huge open space. I started to panic, thinking, is nobody going to show up? But then all of a sudden, the crowds just started pouring in, and there were 30,000 people, and there was a Jumbotron, and I do some stuff where I have the audience singing along, a kind of a call and response. And so to hear 30,000 people singing your call and response, well, there's nothing like that in the world. I mean, and it gives me goosebumps just remembering it. That's a memory. And I also have another beautiful memory of playing in Toronto a couple of years ago, and I did a Christmas concert there. And a dear friend of mine, Melanie Doan, has a ukulele program called U School, like the letter U School. And she teaches kids music using the ukulele as the conduit. And so we ended up inviting them to come and play with us. And at first we had about 15 of them on stage with us. And we did, the Charlie Brown, Linus and Lucy song with the ukuleles, and it was really cute. And then I surprised the audience by having 150 little kids come in through the back doors of the hall, and we did a version of Peggy Lee's Jingle Bells, I like a sleigh ride, with all little kids playing and singing. And they turned the house lights up, and it was packed. It was like a 2,000-seater. It was packed. And I saw the sheer joy and surprise and wonder on the faces of all of these audience members, and sometimes tears, and that I will never forget that moment. It was so wonderful.
That's wonderful. That's a great story. That's exactly what this question is tailored for. The one thing I've always found, too, with jazz is that I've always kind of passed the health of jazz and the vitality of it, and now I know how healthy it is, because one musician, the amount of gigs that have been canceled is staggering. So when this all began, and early to mid-March, how did you know that live jazz was coming to a halt? What gigs were canceled? What was your story?
Oh, it was funny because I guess the first thing that happened is I started to hear about other people's shows being canceled, and it was Instagram, or Facebook. It was happening through social media and through word of mouth. My musicians and I and my booking agents obviously were in very close contact during that time and trying to figure out what's what. So, but it really was sort of a trickling effect, and it was strange because I actually found out that one of my own shows was canceled via Facebook. And I thought, oh, okay, well that's, I guess that's a sign. And, at a certain point, for me, I was going to have to make a tough decision. The tour, for example, I think it was 10 shows. So if, 7 of those 10 shows had been canceled, it probably would not have been possible for me to do the tour as is with the 3 remaining shows. So I would have had to make a tough decision. And so I think in the end, it was just sort of a combination of, in some cases, the venues themselves made the decisions as opposed to the promoter. So the venues decided, hey, you know what, we're going to shut down now until the end of March or the middle of April, and that date kept getting extended. And in some cases, it was artists saying, hey, listen, 6 of my 10 shows have canceled. It's not financially viable for me to travel in between and do these shows. So it was a combination, really. And it was a strange time because it was just every day things were changing and things were evolving.
Yeah, and I think that's the thing about it. I think about kind of 9/11. There's always that story when the world kind of stops and changes, and I think that it's interesting how just one musician, and then you take that regionally, and then you kind of expand that out. It's staggering how much has happened. But I guess my next question, before I get to a one more about the COVID-19, is what do you like the best about being a entertainer?
I love making music, and that's a really simple answer. I love creating music, and I love, but you said performer, so I'm going to try to stay on topic. I love the communication between my bandmates live on stage. I love how that happens, that wordless communication, the conversation that we have using music. And I love hearing personal stories from people. One of my favorite things is to talk to the audience. And again, this is a style, it's my style of performance. I really like to be able to see the audience, talk to the audience, tell them stories about how this song came into my life, what I know about this song, what I'm trying to say with my interpretation of this song. You know, seeing the reactions and feeling the reactions, and then talking to people after the show and hearing their personal stories. You know, there's sort of I'm always shocked and it's flattered and when somebody tells me something like, you know, we came to your concert on our first date and now we're married and we have teenagers, things like that. It's like, wow. Just thinking that I'm a part of somebody's soundtrack to their life, you know, is pretty amazing to me, because, you know, I think about the artists that I look up to, the artists that provide a soundtrack to my life, and it's so meaningful to me. I need it. And I guess the thought of being able to be that for somebody else just never ceases to amaze me.
So on the heels of that, you know, we're going to get back to the live stage at some point. We don't know when, but it will happen. And when we do, what do you hope both musician and audience realizes from this time away?
Yeah, well, you know, and we don't know when. And one of the things that is happening right now is that as we anticipate certain areas opening up, you know, we have all of these shows that were supposed to happen that people are trying to reschedule on top of people that are, you know, got new projects. And so I'm really kind of just trying to take a deep breath and step back and just kind of not get too antsy about it. You know, I'm just going to let things unfold and see what happens, and probably realistically looking into next year. You know, I hope that, I mean, for the most part, I do think that people value music, but, you know, music definitely has become devalued over the years. I mean, we can't deny that. You know, there's a huge part of the population that doesn't want to pay for music, and okay, that is what it is. But even going back to my early performance days at clubs, you know, when I was standing by the door, there's one club in particular that I'm thinking of. It was called the Montreal Bistro in Toronto. It was a wonderful international jazz club. I would be standing near the door waiting to go on stage, and I'd hear people come in and they'd balk at the cover price, you know, which was something like $10, 10 or 15 years ago for an 8-piece band for 3 hours of music. And that always used to obviously kind of rub me the wrong way. And I remember telling a couple of people, just nicely, I would say, hey, listen, give it a shot. If you're not happy, I'll give you your money back. So anyway, I'm kind of rambling now, but I hope that people put value on the experience and understand, you know, how much work and time and resources and financial, you know, fronting of money that it takes. I mean, I don't really think the music business owes me anything, and I would continue to make music. However, you know, I value art, I value music, and I don't know, maybe people will be reminded of that, you know, when it comes time to spending a few bucks for a cover charge, or spending $10 a month to have all the music you could possibly want to listen to every month.
Yeah, you know, it's interesting. There was some years back, they released Monty Python on Amazon for free for a little while. You could view it, and you could also buy it. And it was the largest spike in sales for anything media-wise that was put on Amazon at that time. It was unbelievable. And in Kansas City, the most popular club that we have is the Green Lady Lounge, and then they have another place called the Black Dolphin. It's a little bit different. It's more show-oriented versus the Green Lady being regular gig-oriented people that are in all the time. And they don't charge a cover, but you just put a tip on there. And I think what they bring in is pretty staggering. And I think that's one of the models. I don't know if that's caught on nationwide. I mean, I am all for covers at the door, but I do know that, when people are at their own wits, they really do chip in, and they do pretty well, and it's one of the most popular clubs in Kansas City. So,
well, that's interesting. There are clubs in Toronto that use that model, but I can't say that I know what they bring in compared to what a guarantee would be. I'm not sure, but interesting. That's heartening to hear that people are when they're left to their own devices, that they are obviously feeling like you're feeling like they're giving an amount that's reasonable. Yeah.
I think that's my fear now. I think that it's mighty enough to come back, but I'm just not sure what will or won't come back because, our most popular venue, the Blue Room, is a part of the American Jazz Museum, which the city runs. So there's hope in some places that are going to come back because they'll be funded by local municipalities, but it's just hard to say what and how. And even at this point right now, a lot of our protests are happening in our premier district, which is called the Plaza, and they're destroying it. I mean, they are destroying and graffitiing. Oh, they're demolishing it. I mean, I'm seeing pictures on Facebook now of just total defacing glass. Things are just getting destroyed. And at this point right now, these businesses are already being adversely affected by not being open for 3 months, and then now their actual physical sites getting demolished. So a lot of cities are going to be dealing with that right now, I think, here in America.
Yes, absolutely.
So we'll see. We'll see what comes back. And we all thought, again, that it was merely the pandemic we would have to fight. But, it's going to be something bigger now. So we will see.
There will be many venues and that won't, music venues, if we're talking about that specifically, but that won't survive. I mean, and there was something interesting that was happening right when the shows were getting canceled or postponed. And I noticed this not just with mine, but with other artists, is that some of the venues were kind of putting out a plea to patrons to not ask for a refund, to consider donating, the value of their ticket, which I reacted to kind of strangely because I thought, well, okay, if a person feels like doing that, that is a great thing to do. But also, people are now under so much financial pressure that, I know there are people that just do not have a lot of disposable income. And that's another story that I get from people sometimes after the show. They say to me, our budget allows us to go to 2 concerts a year, and you're one of them. I thought that it was a bit of an awkward scenario, kind of putting pressure on these patrons to donate their ticket when now they probably can't even pay their mortgage,
Yeah, and I'm in a different boat as a jazz journalist, and I've, during the course of doing interviews during this pandemic, I always hear about, feeling, hopefully the crowds are, they just yearn for it, and there's more respect and there's more reverence. And I've always thought before every show, I just sit there and I always take a breath in, and I'm like, wow, I'm just, this is what I do. This is something I'm very passionate about, but I'm very cognizant of it. I remember one of the last shows I saw live was Bill Frisell came through our local Nelson Atkins Museum of Art, and he had his trio. And towards the end of the show, this was March 3rd, Petra Hayden stood up and started singing We Shall Overcome. And it was as though the crowd kind of had this notion of what was coming, and everybody just started kind of rising and weaving in unison, saying We Shall Overcome. And I think about that moment, and I'm like, wow. But it was such an eclectic show. They went from that to Ziggy Stardust after that. So it was like we went from this buoyant moment of we're going to let humanity kind of come together before this pandemic hits our world, and then we go into David Bowie. But, it was great. And, I got married last summer, and my wife, I've been taking her to shows for the last 3 years, and that was one of her favorite shows. She must have cried 3 times during the show. So for that to be our final, adios to the old world was quite a way to bow out, so to speak.
And that's really incredible, right? And that's one of the things about being a performer and one of the things about music. I mean, to be able to take people on this journey, to be able to have this range of emotions during a concert. I mean, that's wonderful.
Yeah, it was great. So I guess my final question to you is, everyone has a version or a perception of who they think you are, your family, your friends, your fans, but you're the one living your life. Who do you think you are?
Who do I think I am? Who do you think you are?
Exactly, with bravado.
Oh, that's funny. Oh my goodness, Joe.
I saved the heavy for last.
I am a person who loves to laugh. I'm a person who is a singer at the absolute heart of my soul. That's who I am. I want to think that I'm a generous person. I try to be a generous person. I am a person who is still learning, who's realizing with every passing day that I have so much more to learn. And I'm a person who's trying to be better every day. And I am a person who's not afraid of the unknown and not afraid of not knowing what's going to happen next in my own life. I am a person who's really trying to savor every day.
That's a great answer. Thank you, Emily, for opening up with Neon Jazz and talking to us. And I got to say, in so many of these interviews that I've done during the quarantine, I've never heard more birds in my entire life. It's like every other interview. It's awesome. And that's the thing. It's like, I mean, I think the thing about these pandemic interviews is that it's all about capturing the essence of how we're living our lives. And quite frankly, I think a lot of these interviews have happened because people actually have the time to do them now. So birds have definitely been a part of it.
Yeah, well, that's there are a lot here. We're living amongst them, and that is a very joyful thing for me. So glad you got to hear a few of our cast of characters over here.
Yeah, well, I one of the best ones was in Costa Rica. There was a musician that moved there from New York, and he had macaws around him, and that was pretty majestic. But I can't remember the musician's name. It'll come back to me when we get off the phone. But she had an album called Bird Calls, and I was talking to her about it. She was doing her homage, so to speak, to how jazz musicians will play their horn to the sounds of birds. And Eric Dolphy was very, very famous for doing that. His music would chart the way that the birds would speak to each other, and he would play his horn and focus in on the way the birds were going back and forth. And I think it's been a part of the jazz lineage that I don't know if it's been that well documented, but it's definitely been a part of what musicians with horns have done.
Oh, it's so interesting. And both Steve and I, because our ears are so attuned to pitch and harmony and rhythm and anything that could be musical. And again, that's one of the reasons that we love being here. I mean, it's just so extreme, and the sounds and the colors, and it's so vibrant where we are. It's inspiring, And so we hear the music and we hear the rhythm and all of the bird sounds. And I will tell you this, that the robins, or the thrushes, they sound the most, I don't want to say musical because they're all very musical, but they're most diatonic. Their songs sound the most like we would recognize as a sort of like Western diatonic melody, But we often are moved to imitate the sounds and make little songs. And it's inspiring, It's inspiring to have that oral landscape.
It is interesting. I've actually been listening more to I love birds anyway, but I've been listening more to like the robins and kind of how the way they speak, they demand almost a response from somebody else, and there's a way that they speak to each other. Here in Missouri, they're all over. So we just moved to Lee Summit, the home of Pat Metheny, and in our backyard we have a nest, and there's babies in there, and I'll go up and look every once in a while and just kind of see what they're doing and sounds they're making. So it's interesting, very interesting how they all kind of interact with each other.
Yeah, it's amazing, and the range of the vocabularies that some of these birds have is astounding. There's one bird that I'm going to give anybody who's listening, or if you're if this is a part is on the air. Look up a chachalaca. cha-cha, like the dance, cha-cha-laka, L-A-C-A. And this is a bird that has the weirdest sound. And the cha-cha-laka is like it kind of looks like a pheasant. They don't really fly. They kind of soar. They glide from tree to tree. It's the only thing I can describe it as is it sounds like a rusty old car engine trying to start up. And I'll leave you with that because you can Google it. There's one time I tried to do an impression of a cha-cha-laka, and I think I injured myself.
That's awesome. You know, the one thing that we've noticed, too, it's funny you mentioned that. There's cranes all over. We have lakes everywhere. And, of course, during the pandemic, you got to get out. Going to lakes and just looking at things is great. But I've noticed a complete influx of, like, cranes flying all over the place. And at one point, I was teaching my stepdaughter how to drive, and we were at a local nature sanctuary, and it's a pandemic, so, you know, there's no cops out. It's fine. So we're driving around, and one of the cranes started flying and made the strangest sound. So when you said that, it's like, it's a sound there's no way that we could ever duplicate it. And I've never heard him make a sound. And there were some turkey buzzards, and I think it was freaked out because they were infringing on his food stores. So it was bad. It was just this cacophony.
Oh,
so, yeah,
what a scene.
Hey, thank you again. Good luck with everything. I appreciate it.
Thanks. You too. Take care.
Thanks for listening and tuning into another Neon Jazz interview, where we give you a bit of insight into the finest minds in Canada, Kansas City, and spots all over the world, giving fans all that jazz. Thanks to Emily for giving us her time and story. If you want to hear more interviews, you can find Neon Jazz Archive interviews on Apple Podcast or Spotify. Subscribe to us at youtube.com, and for everything Neon Jazz, go to the neonjazz.blogspot.com. Until next time, enjoy the jazz, my friends.
No, we don't want your kind round here.
Neon Jazz.